Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Dietrich and my instructional technique is the closing. I'm going to be going through a PowerPoint with you. I just wanted to give you sort of a quick overview as to my presentation. It can be accessed through a Wix site that I created, and you're welcome to leave me questions. You can actually go to the very bottom of any of one of the pages and you'll see my email address and a link to the discussion forum that's actually built into the Wix site, but you're certainly welcome to leave me discussion posts in the course as well. So without further ado, I shall take you to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the agenda for today's lesson. We're going to review this presentation and we're then going to complete a quiz, and there'll be a link to the quiz at the end of this presentation, but you can also link to it from the navigation bar and from the agenda on the main page of the site. You're then going to be asked to construct a closing using Flipgrid, and I have some information as to how to use Flipgrid for you within that activity. Again, if you have questions, let me know. It's pretty intuitive and you can utilize it to create an audio file, a video file, or a text presentation. So have fun with it. I think it's a wonderful tool. Then number 4, you're asked to contribute a reflective discussion post in the discussion form. Again, that's within the site, and that's pertaining to a personal experience with the closing in an educational setting, or you can respond to a peer's post, entirely up to you. And number 5, I'm asking you to complete an exit ticket, and that'll give me some feedback on the thoughts you had about today's lesson. Okay, so the learning outcome. So number 1, at the end of this lesson, students will be able to describe what constitutes an effective lesson plan closing. Evidence of this learning will be demonstrated through completion of a quiz. Learning outcome 2, at the end of this lesson, students will be able to identify the elements of adult learning theory that support the use of the lesson plan closing. And evidence of this learning will be demonstrated through construction of a lesson plan closing. Okay, so some general comments, just a bit of an introduction to the closing. An effective closing should accomplish the following. So it should briefly summarize the lesson, and it should stimulate the minds of learners for what's to come. It should also encourage personal reflection and contemplation. So learners should be going through some type of a reflective exercise. And it should demonstrate how the material is setting the stage for future concepts and information. So how is it linking to the module to be covered next week? How did it link to last week's module, for example? Those types of things, those transitions should be part of the closing. And you definitely want to circle back to those learning outcomes, show that complete learning loop at the end of the class, gives closure to the students, but it also shows them, hey, gives them confidence, shows them, hey, look what I've done, look what I've learned moving forward in the course. And it certainly allows you, or it should allow you, to ascertain if more concentration is needed in a certain area. So how did learners do? Did they learn what you thought they were going to be learning? And if not, what students need some additional help? What additional resources perhaps could you provide, or additional activities or additional sessions could you provide to help those learners who didn't satisfy the outcomes completely? And find out what worked and what didn't by way of activities, so that you can know how to actually go about strategically setting up your lesson plans in the future. And you can integrate formative or summative assessments into your closing as well, to give yourself enough time to get through all of these elements, but you can do it fairly quickly, but you don't want to be rushed. Now I'm going to actually take you to that video that I mentioned. And basically what it's going to do is going to give you some information from an educator, Dr. Shane Robinson from Oklahoma State University. He's going to speak to why a closing of a lesson is so important and why instructors need to pay more attention to the closing. Okay, so I'm going to connect you to that right now.
The end of the lesson is probably one of the most crucial and unfortunately misused phases of the lesson. All too often, faculty teach right up until the end of the class period and then simply release their students. Research shows that the end of the lesson is incredibly valuable time for both instructors and students. Faculty should set aside whatever time is necessary to review major components of the lesson and ensure the objectives were accomplished. This is a time for both formative and/or summative assessment to occur. At the end of each lesson, consider asking yourself the question, did my students learn what I intended to teach them? Knowing the answer to this question helps inform instructors of where and how to progress to the next day's lesson. Learning is a series of building blocks. Each lesson should naturally flow into the next. That said, instructors should have a time to wrap up their lessons and provide students a preview of the next day's lesson activities. Practice the habit of leaving 5 to 10 minutes to summarize the key points of each lesson. This can be done through a direct reminder, a question and answer discussion period, or a short quiz, just to name a few. Madeline Hunter said that effective teaching includes the ability to make professional decisions after the lesson. Acquiring evidence on what your students learned or didn't will help you make better professional decisions moving forward. So, the next time you teach a lesson, end it on your own terms by highlighting the key elements you hope to get across to students.
Okay, I'm going to take us back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so what I did is I actually took the Smart Art tool and I created this from the information that I went through and the research that I did. I created the 5 R's. So really an effective closing should encompass these central components: review, reinforcement, reflection, reinvigoration, and readiness. And I'm going to go through those. You're going to see this particular graphic throughout my presentation. So get used to seeing it. Okay, so the 5 R's of a good closing. So review. So you need to provide a brief summation. You need to go over the key points, the key learning points, critical elements of the lesson. You actually have a really solid window at the very beginning of class, the very end of class to capture students' attention. So you want to make sure that you capitalize on that attention and go over those key points. And then you also want to make sure that you're drawing correlations between what was covered and the stated expectations at the beginning of the class through going over those learning outcomes, closing that loop of learning, and showing the students that point A to point B was reached, and this is what we covered. This is actually the expectations of the lesson, and this is where you should be at this point in time. You need to also reinforce the second one there by clearly stating why this is important information. So why, in fact, was it covered? What is the purpose of its existence in the curriculum? And you've spoken to the learning outcomes. You could do a course outcome. This is why we're studying this particular closing, because it's so very important part of instructional techniques that we know how to close a class, and that's what this course is about. So align those topics. Also to any theories that you have. So how we refer back to the adult learning theories, of course, any types of academic underpinning you can provide at that point too. You can do that, excuse me, within the closing. You need to provide that opportunity for students to reflect. Some type of reflection opportunity through a discussion board, through a breakout room where small groups are discussing, how this is impacting their particular perception of how they're going to go about closing the class in the future. From my experience, small groups can really be powerful. And it's really the first steps in many cases, especially if you're working with a cohort of students, for a community of learners to actually be created. So, so really think about solid opportunities where students can actually reflect on what has been taught and how it pertains to their personal life history. Reinvigorate. So this really speaks to the passion and the excitement that I believe an instructor should have for the content that they're actually teaching. You know, giving students a reason to get excited about what they're learning about, and you know, speaking to what students are going to be learning next week, and showing them in some cases. So like a little bit of a trailer. This is what we're going to be studying, and you'll see that I incorporated this technique onto the site in the closing section. So take a look at that, and you'll see that there are distinct elements of the 5 R's lurking in that closing site, of course, because that is the closing of this lesson plan. So you can take a look at how I did that. And finally, ready your students and prepare them. Prepare them for next class. Think about how you can ease the minds of those students who might be nervous about what's coming. You know, giving them a heads up. Some students need some additional time to prepare for certain activities potentially. So this can work to ready those students. Checking in on understanding and figuring out if there's any additional time that needs to be spent to help students who might be struggling with concepts or information, and getting a sense of what worked and what didn't. You know, what engagement activities were a hit, and what ones do you think you might not bother using next time because they just didn't work. And we all have to experiment. And I know I've tried certain things that I'm not going to revisit, but you don't know unless you try. So now, just thinking about the 5 R's, take some time to, and I'm going to actually take you to the Jamboard now. Okay, take some time to go to the Jamboard and you know, write some ideas that you know may have come to mind while you've been listening to the 5 R's. You know, how would you go about reviewing? Is there some application, instructional technique, some strategy that you've seen that you want to share? Do that here. And you can certainly comment on more than 1 R and comment on all of them if you'd like. You can put pictures, links to information you may have come across. You know, you can add anything you want via Jamboard. So please take the time to do that. It's not required, but it's an activity that I hope you'll participate in. Okay, so I'm going to pop back into the PowerPoint now. Okay. And I am going to speak to the alignment with adult learning theory. Okay, so the alignment with adult learning theory, very, very important. I was speaking to the academic underpinning, the whys, and the you know, the framework that needs to be there to be in place for learning to take place. We need this information. So if we look at Malcolm Knowles, he posited that adult learners have a defined self-concept. They have a rich and robust life history to draw from. So we need to be encouraging students to tap into that life history and those memories for learning to be impactful. So that relevance is key. It's really important that students see, why am I learning this? Adult learners need to know, why am I doing this? How is this going to help me? How am I going to use this in my daily life? How am I going to use this in my work? So they really, really need to see the relevance. And they also, according to Knowles, want to really be involved in evaluating and planning of their instruction. So that feedback that you get from them is important, and it's very, very critical for making decisions moving forward in your course. David Kolb, you know, he's someone that I certainly spend a lot of time with each semester, because I work in cooperative education, and the experiential learning cycle figures prominently in our training materials, because reflection is so very, very important to learning when you're actually in a work integrated learning opportunity, in a cooperative education opportunity or co-op. So students need to be able to reflect on their learning, what's working, what isn't. Metacognitive strategies as well can really be utilized effectively, by reflecting on how you learn, not just what you're learning. So it's a key part of this particular closing because we want students to be reflecting on what they just learned, and seeing where, in fact, these strategies can be utilized in their actual life. So really tying in all of these adult learning theories because they definitely overlap, but really, really important for an authentic learning experience to take place is incorporating those reflection opportunities within the framework of your lesson plan, especially at the closing of the class. Excuse me. Daniel Pratt. So Daniel Pratt's TPI, if we look to the developmental dimension, again, that material that you're imparting needs to be impactful for students. So they need to be making direct correlations to why it is important that they know it, that they're learning it. And so opportunities have to be made to actually provide students with the opportunity to draw those connections with the learning and why it will be impactful and useful for them in their work and moving forward in their education as well. So if you're learning a concept like critical thinking, why is that going to be something that's going to be useful for you and impactful for you down the road? So we'll move into the recap, okay? And this video, just a little bit of history of it. It was created using Powtoon and it's uploaded into YouTube. And so I'm going to play that video for you right now. You can click and drag through it if you don't want to watch it right now. And the link will be, as I mentioned, on that presentation page. Okay, so without further ado, here's the recap. going to take you back to the PowerPoint. Okay. And we're just going to round off the discussion by revisiting the agenda. So what is next in this lesson? So we've reviewed the presentation. You're going to click on this link or the link from the site to complete the quiz. And that's activity 1. Number 3, you'll construct a closing using Flipgrid. That's activity 2. Number 4, you'll contribute a reflective discussion post. And number 5, you'll complete the exit ticket to let me know your thoughts about the lesson. So again, if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And that is the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was informative.